Hey everybody. All right, how did you like the season finale of Dead City season 2? If history were a conflagration. I actually really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. I actually really like where they're going with this, and I thought it was a pretty good finale. I will admit the first season of Dead City, it was not my favorite. If anything, I was a little bit bored with it. But I've really enjoyed the second season, and maybe it's because there's more Beth symbolism in it. That could definitely be why. But I think I haven't enjoyed the storyline more too. So let's just hop into it. Um, so we start with Maggie unconscious and tied up, which I don't think I got a picture of, and then it kind of goes through this whole. It's not really a montage, but it kind of shows each of the characters, Maggie and Herschel, Armstrong, Negan and Ginny, kind of where they all are at the beginning. And then it kind of shifts to the opening credits. Then we go to Bruegel in his museum, and he's getting things together. He talks to Armstrong, and Armstrong kind of realizes that Bruegel knows where Ginny went and demands to know what's going on. And Bruegel just says that he gave Ginny a lift to see Negan. And then he talks about how this is super fun. This is the game he likes to play because now he knows that Negan means something to Ginny and Ginny means something to Negan, so she can be insurance. Um, and he also learns that Armstrong is actually a pretty good guy, not an evil guy. Then we shift to Negan and Ginny in her cell. She's still not well yet. And Benjamin shows up and says that people are asking for Negan upstairs. Negan says Benjamin doesn't have to stay if he doesn't want. But Benjamin says, I don't have anywhere else to go. And then he says, maybe I'll be there in spirit instead of physically. So he doesn't actually want to fight. But I think Negan kind of knew that about him, that he's not really a fighter. So anyway, that's pretty much it. He tells Ginny that he is going to go. So then we go back to Maggie. Now, I will say that Maggie waking up like this definitely gave me Grady vibes, not only because she's tied up, which, clearly Beth was not tied up at Grady, but she is a prisoner. And they did have a big emphasis on the door being shut. There are keys involved with which Maggie gets a hold of to try and cut her uh, restraints with. And then the Dama comes in. And again, it just kind of reminded me of Dawn and Edwards coming in, right, at Grady. So the Dama comes in and asks basically if Maggie's hungry. She says she's been wanting to meet her, all of that. She starts cracking nuts for her. And what this reminded me of, kind of a callback to, I mean, I'm sure we've seen this other times, but specifically 511, I believe it was, The Distance, when they meet Aaron. I remember that Rick was trying to crack nuts to give to baby Judith, and that's when Aaron offered him the applesauce. So it just kind of reminded me of that. Um, I'm not entirely sure what the cracking of the nuts represents. I know people have looked at the Nutcracker before, the actual uh, plot of it, because it is about a girl who wakes up in a new land, kind of like, Beth did at Grady. You could say this with Maggie. She did come here on purpose, which was not true of Beth, but she still woke up a prisoner, so maybe they're looking toward that. But I think there's probably some sort of specific symbolism going on here, and I'm just not sure what it is. I've never paid terribly close attention to it, but it's worth keeping an eye on, right? Of course, the Dama realizes that Maggie has taken the keys and demands them back. At first, Maggie is just really defiant about it and keeps like sawing at her restraints, even though the Dama is looking at her. But then the Dama threatens to punish Herschel for it. So Maggie finally gives them to her. Once again, the Dama is smart and manipulative, right? So then we go back to the church, and Bruegel and Armstrong, along with him, have arrived at the church. They offer Negan as a gift a statue of the Madonna. It's a very famous statue. And Negan has set up a feast for them, obviously. And Bruegel doesn't trust and doesn't want to eat the feast. And that's mostly because of Armstrong. Armstrong's actually smarter than Bruegel is about this. I mean, Bruegel's pretty smart about it, but it's mostly because Armstrong keeps saying something's wrong, And so Bruegel refuses to eat. Armstrong does notice that there's, I'm assuming it's gasoline or oil accelerant of some kind on the bench, but I don't think he really knows what to do with that. He sees it, but he's not understanding what its significance is. And Negan goes and eats some of the food to prove that it isn't poisoned. But then after that, the organ music stops, which is actually kind of interesting. I mean, it was a small detail, but if you think of it in terms of Beth's music, it was like the music stopped and then the death was about to occur, kind of a thing. So I thought that was kind of an interesting detail, but they shut the doors. They flip over the table, which actually has walkers hiding in it. I have no idea how they pulled that off, but it was kind of cool. And then they start everything that was on the benches, they start it on fire. So they're trapping Bruegel's people so that they can pick them all off. And remember, this is what Negan said he would do at the end of the last episode. He's like, nope, I'm done. We're just going to kill them all. So this is what he is trying to do. Back where Maggie is, she and the Dama talk, and the Dama fully admits that she is using Herschel, and she kind of gives Maggie the same spiel that she gave Herschel, that he, never knew the old world, and therefore he can see so much more and imagine so much a better world for them moving forward, but it needs a protector. And she thought that would be Negan, but that didn't work out. So she's basically asking Maggie to kill Negan. Probably the biggest thing about this part is that we actually did get a Beth mention here. Not by name, of course, but she talks about everyone's Maggie has lost. She says, your mother, your father, and your sister. Now, and then she says, and now your son. And she has talked about Herschel. At this part, she talked about how, of course, Maggie hates Negan because Negan killed her husband. But still, it was kind of interesting to me. Obviously, the Dama is getting most of her information from probably Herschel. But it's interesting that they said mother, father, sister. They didn't mention Maggie's brother, and they didn't mention anybody else. I mean, certainly Herschel knows that Maggie's lost other people, like friends, acquaintances and things. And these are the only ones that she specifically mentions. So I felt like they really emphasized the sister, even though they didn't use Beth's name. I know a lot of people were saying they hoped we would get a Beth mention here. I don't know if this is exactly what you wanted. It's not exactly her name, but even so, I felt like she sort of slowed down or stopped a little bit when she said sister. Um, so there was a little bit of an emphasis there. And so basically, she's trying to manipulate Maggie into going to kill Negan for her. And even during the episode Insider, the actress that plays the Dama even said that. She's like, "Oh yeah, it was all manipulation," when I was talking to Maggie. So that's definitely a thing. Then we go back to the church. I did notice that Negan is eating a green apple while this is going on. I think we've actually seen him do this before. I want to say we've seen him eat a green apple before. I want to say, I know there were tomatoes, like back in during All Out War in Carl's vision. I feel like this might be a callback to that, but I also think it's just supposed to be him, like he's being the old Negan here, right? He's doing things that he's done before that he has pulled away from since. And so it might also just be them trying to show that he's, back to his old self and this isn't good. We've talked about various things apples can mean. I need to go into this one a little bit in more detail before I really make up my mind about what they're pointing to here. But it is really interesting, and it is whether we've seen him. I can't 100% say that we've seen him eat an apple, but I know we've seen other people eat them, and I think that the green versus the red is on purpose. Um, I think I'm going to come back to this because I have some theories on what this might be, but I need to look back over some other things, so I don't want to commit to them yet. So I will come back to that in a later video, I promise. Anyway, meanwhile, Armstrong knocks over the Madonna statue, and there are actually weapons inside. So Negan was hiding walkers in the table, and Bruegel was hiding weapons in the statue. Um, very trusting partners, of course. The thing that's interesting, we could definitely read into the Madonna, um, because she's in the statue, even she's taking care of a child, and obviously it's the Christ child. And we do always say that Beth is the Christ figure, but in this case, I almost think this could be synonymous with Beth, and just because she's taking care of kids, and we know that Beth took care of kids a lot when she was on the show, and that she's got all the symbolism around her for taking care of kids. Probably in the future we'll see that again. And then there were weapons. in the statue. And we always say that Beth is going to be Team Family's, secret weapon in some way. So I feel like this was on purpose. I do feel like this was a little bit of Beth symbolism. Um, so neither of these shots is very good. It's just them pulling the weapons out of the statue, but this was a high action scene. It's hard to get screenshots from that. But then Negan gets his bat and his people get their weapon, and then we have the obligatory gore going on here, right? Bruegel actually gets a hold of one of the flame, it's not really a flamethrower, one of the flame guns, and starts chasing Negan around with it. Back with Maggie, Herschel does come to see her, and she admits to him that he was, that he was right, and that she's not over Negan and what happened. She's never been over it. And Herschel just says that he wants them to move on and be a family and be free of everything, but there's only one way to do that. So Maggie agrees that she will go finish it and kill Negan. Meanwhile, Benjamin stays away from the battle. He's on the rooftop with the lookout, right? Who I gotta say is not the best lookout. She somehow managed to miss a ship that's a little bit far out in the water, but she also missed a whole bunch of kayaks that are tied up. And so these people have come on her watch and she ends up getting killed. The guy that bursts in and shoots her asks Ben who he's with, and he says New Babylon. So clearly this is the second wave of New Babylon showing up. And by doing that, Benjamin saved his own life. Then we go back to the Negan Bruegel situation. There's a lot of dead people and walkers in the church, and Bruegel is wandering around looking for Negan. And then he sees this, you really can't see it right here, but there's a cord. It's the cord, the extension that goes to her ventilator, right? That's like plugged in somewhere. So he follows that and he realizes that it's going to Ginny's cell. And so he smiles real big, real creepy. He obviously wants to do something to Ginny. But I mean, I think if anything, he was probably going to take her so that he could use her against Negan. And then Armstrong shows up and kind of attacks him. And I was laughing actually at Bruegel quite a bit. I don't know if we're meant to laugh at him, but he's kind of a goofy villain. And this part he goes, "What?" As though he wasn't doing anything wrong. It's like, dude, you were totally going to go and get Ginny, and Armstrong already attacked you once for that. Like, what do you mean, what? Then, of course, Negan shows up. They get surrounded by Negan's men. And see, this shot actually reminded me a little bit of the last season of Daryl Dixon when Daryl was fighting Lo Sang. They had a very similar shot to this, and it was even in a church where Daryl stepped up and you could just see kind of this shot, like his shoes and the back of his calves. And in his case, it was that mace, the spiky ball on the chain, and he dropped it, but it was a very similar shot to this. Okay, in this case, obviously it's Negan and the bat. Bruegel immediately starts begging for his life, telling Negan everything he can do to help. But and then, yeah, he immediately points, it was him. Bruegel's just such a goofball. I have a hard time hating him, even though he's super twisted, And at this point, I was like, okay, they're probably going to kill him off. So Negan puts them both on their knees. Maggie gets there and is watching the whole thing. And of course, this is freaking her out because it's very much like what happened back in season 6, right, of the flagship show. He does his eeny, meeny, miny, mo thing. And he actually lands on Armstrong, but then he says, you know what, I want to kill Bruegel more. And he doesn't, smash in his head with the bat. At least that's not how he kills him. But he does put the methane hose in his mouth and then sets his insides on fire, which is really disgusting. Yeah, this was pretty gross and a pretty horrible way to die. Not that it isn't fitting for Bruegel, but it was pretty gnarly. And then after that, Negan smashes his head with the bat, which is just traumatizing poor Maggie all over again. Armstrong gets up and runs. And then we have the shot of Bruegel's watch, and I almost feel like I need to go back through and look at the times that they mentioned his watch, because I remember them mentioning it, and it's like a really expensive watch. But here you really can't see where the hands are. I think there's one here. I think this is one, which is probably pointing to a 2. And I'm wondering if the other one is here under the blood and you can't see it because I'm not seeing another hand anywhere else. And if that's the case, this is pointing to 10 and 2. And that's really important. Okay, that's it's like a death and resurrection thing, right? It's a really important time. And we've looked at that in terms of Beth before. So I need to go back and pay attention to the watch references throughout the season because I don't remember what they were, although I do remember them talking about the watch. And it's just interesting because now he's dead. The watch is smashed, which is obviously very symbolic. You know, the guy who was wearing it is now dead. But just because of the clocks around Beth all the time, references, it's just super interesting, super interesting. So then Negan goes after Armstrong. They fight. Maggie kills the guards. And just when Negan is about to take out Armstrong, Maggie runs up behind and stabs him. And I gotta say, I didn't really think they were gonna kill Negan. I just feel like he has further to go. But it did occur to me, well, that would be a really shocking twist if they actually did kill off Negan's character. But obviously, they are not ready to do that, and I'm glad. After he gets stabbed, he starts crawling toward Ginny's cell, and Maggie really does seem like she's gonna kill him and is ready to. And then we have the arm. So, unfortunately, spoiler, Ginny dies. And that was surprising to me. This is one of those things that The Walking Dead is really good at. I mean, I don't think anybody is surprised when people get killed off anymore. We've had 15 years of this show and we're pretty used to it. But even so, they very, very heavily hinted that Ginny would survive. Like, Negan kept talking about how if we just keep her here and don't move her and use the ventilator, that's her best chance of recovery. You know what I mean? Like they never once talked about her dying. And what this reminded me of, at least in terms of the way it functions in the episode, is it reminded me of Sophia. It was just somebody that everybody knew there was a good chance she was going to die, but you didn't think she actually had yet. And then, just like Sophia walked out of the barn, Ginny reaches out from her cell and she is a walker. And even in the episode Insider, Jeffrey Dean Morgan said that this was very much like Lucille for Negan, and I can see that because, um, he was trying to take care of her, and she was ill. The illnesses. Having to even to using the ventilator. He said that he had to learn how to use a ventilator for Lucille, and then he got one for Ginny. And then the fact that when he got back to her, she was already a walker. Yeah, so yeah, the parallels are definitely there in terms of Negan's storyline, but like I said, this also reminded me a lot of Sophia. And so this was kind of an interesting, sad, but interesting twist that this happened because I didn't expect Ginny to actually die. Let's see. So, of course, Negan cries. He's very upset by this, understandably. And this is an interesting shot. They actually focused on the dog in her cell just for a minute, right? If you blink, you probably missed it. But she's in the foreground and that she went blurry, and so they could focus on the dog. And that's really interesting because it is the serious dog. Now, you may be wondering, okay, but is she going to get resurrected then? I don't think so. I'm wondering, I mean, the Sirius is all about returning, leaving for a time and then coming back, but it's always a little bit nebulous how they're using it. You could argue that Ginny's resurrection was simply becoming a walker. Everybody technically resurrects as a walker if they're not put down or stabbed in the brain first. But it also could be that, seeing the dog itself is more of a death omen, as in it's the omen that they're going away. And I don't know that we specifically saw resurrection symbols around Ginny, whereas we saw them constantly around Beth. So I don't know. I mean, I'll have to think about it more. We also have something yellow in her cell over here. But either way, even if, it seems like the resurrection doesn't fit exactly Ginny as it did Beth, I think it's just another way of showing that she's a proxy to Beth. At the end of the day, it's really that it's about. I would even argue that this isn't a real dog. It's a stuffed dog, and maybe that's doesn't really matter. But with Beth, they actually had a real dog. You know what I mean? So it was like a more potent symbol. So this really could just be to show that she's a proxy in some way. But either way, it was very sad development. And what happens with Maggie here, I think is really interesting. Part of what I really liked is, what happens here. I mean, obviously, Negan's very sad. Maggie gives him the knife so that he can put Ginny down, just like he did with Lucille. So that's another parallel. And then here, you can't see it very well, but Maggie actually puts a hand on his shoulder and is comforting him. And so it's such an interesting dynamic because it's like, okay, sorry, I stabbed you 5 minutes ago, but now I feel bad and I'm going to comfort you. But I think I watched the ending of this a couple of times and I think it came together for me in a big way, but I had to watch it more than once to completely internalize it. So let's keep going through it because this next part is also really important for what happens with Maggie and Herschel. So they take Negan to this apartment. I wasn't sure if this was supposed to be Armstrong's old apartment or if they just picked some place to take him so that he could recover. They take the knife out, they start taking care of him, and then Negan says this thing about how he was so busy trying to look out for Ginny, or what he thought was looking out for Ginny, that he missed it. And then he says, and she died alone. And, for Negan, obviously he's thinking about Lucille because it really is a replay of what happened with Lucille. And I'm wondering, because that means Negan is kind of stuck in this loop. It's happened more than once, right? With Lucille, she very heavily hinted to him that she was going to take her own life, but he just chose to not believe her and to go out and look for her medicine and that she would be fine, to believe that she would be fine. And then when he came back, she was dead. And then with Ginny, he just decided the best thing to do to keep her alive would be to kill everybody. But while he was doing that, she died. So you see that it's happening more than once. He's in this loop. So way back after season 8, after All Out War, when they decided to keep him alive rather than putting him down, um, and Rick put him in the cell and everything, a lot of us theorized that the only way he could really make up for having killed Glenn and Abraham would be to sacrifice himself for somebody, one of our good guys at Alexandria or whatever. And we often wondered if it might be Judith or RJ. Now, we kind of saw hints of that. There was a time that Judith got lost out in the storm and he went and got her. And then remember, Michonne came back and thanked Negan for helping her. So we've seen it a little bit. But I'm wondering if the only way he's going to make up for things and the only way he's going to get himself out of this loop is by helping Maggie to not only take down the Dama, but to bring Herschel back to her emotionally, right? Not just physically. And maybe that will help him get out of this loop, because I think what we're going for here is that he's actually afraid. He wouldn't probably admit that, but he's afraid to go back to Annie and his son and to be with them, because everybody he tries to take care of ends up getting killed. And he doesn't want that. And so if he can get himself out of this loop, then he can probably go back to Annie and his son. And I kind of think long term, in terms of his arc, that's kind of what they're going for. But Maggie sees this and hears him say this. So first, she obviously had compassion on him because he lost Ginny, which to him was like a daughter, and she could see how broken up he was. And of course, she understands that, not only because she lost Glenn, but because she's losing Herschel. She's like in process of losing Herschel. But if you really think about what Negan says here, it was that he didn't prioritize being with Ginny in her time of need. He probably could have assigned someone else to do the stuff in the church, or he could have just not done that. You know what I mean? Like, but he decided he wanted to because he wanted to take out Bruegel. And don't get me wrong, I think it was probably a good thing to take out Bruegel because he was just a disaster waiting to happen, right? But it was specifically that Negan was upset that she died alone, that he was not there for her. And this is when Maggie says, okay, I got something to do. I have to go. So then she returns to Herschel and the Dama. And of course, Herschel's really upset with her. He knows right away when she walks in that she did not kill Negan. He says, you promised me, you said it was going to be better, and now we're just back to the same old thing. And from what Maggie says, we kind of understand that she underwent a huge shift, I think, in this episode, because she was so willing to kill Negan. I mean, this was kind of the ultimate moment when she could have done it finally, and it's been building for years and years and years, but she specifically tells Herschel that they were wrong. And I think what she means there is that it wouldn't have freed them. It wouldn't have made things better. It wouldn't have helped them to move on from it. She says that we were wrong and killing Negan would have only made it worse, which is probably true, right? But she very much focuses on Herschel in this moment. And she says, basically, you do what you got to do. Like, I think she recognizes that it's kind of too little too late to get him away from the Dama. He's going to have to do that on his own. But she says, I'll always be here for you. I'm not going to leave the city. And you can tell that surprised Herschel, and it also kind of confused him. He wasn't sure what to make of that. But honestly, this is probably the best thing Maggie could do for him. I mean, it's a little too late to keep him from the Dama's clutches. I mean, she has already won him over and convinced him that if Maggie doesn't, quote unquote, love him enough to kill Negan, then he needs to be with her, the Dama. But this way, she's just there to support Herschel, and she's not following her own agenda to kill Negan necessarily. And for right now, like I said, that's probably the best thing and the only thing she can really do for him. So I thought that that was a good way to go about it. Obviously, we've got a lot more story here to tell. It's not over by any means. Um, but just to show him that she's there to support him and doesn't have her own agenda will go a long way, even if it's going to take a while for him to really trust her and come back to her. So after that, we see Maggie and Armstrong and Negan sitting in the apartment, and they do see New Babylon soldiers marching. Now, I do want you to notice in the background of this picture, we have a yellow, I'm assuming it's a cab, but a yellow car with the trunk popped here. And then this is a mail truck. It says New York Post. Remember, they were in the New York Times building before, but I think this is maybe part of the communication theme because it's kind of a mail truck. And then it says New York Post, as in getting out the the news in a way. So anyway, just kind of some interesting symbols going on there in the background. But anyway, New Babylon is here, and Negan says, okay, well, that's it. They're going to take over. They're going to get the methane. And where do we go from here? So Armstrong starts reciting the story that I'm blanking on her name, but I believe it was the leader of the foragers who told it to him about the man who comes to a fork in his path. And he can either go left, which will take him home and into his past, or he can go right and go into the future, but it's uncertain either way. And then I gotta say, I really loved this little ending thing where they had Negan and Maggie, the voiceovers kind of go back and forth about what their choices were. And I wrote down most of what they said. So first Maggie says left, back home to the way things were, but all that's waiting for him is an old story that hurts too much to remember. And then Negan's voiceover says, so he goes right, but there's nothing there for him either, because what's the future without the past? What's an ending without that old story? And then Maggie says, the truth is there's only one way forward, one way to move on. We got to work through what was. And then Negan says, to get to what will be, it's a path that's hard and rough and all uphill. We keep thinking we'll never make it. And then they alternate this next part. Sometimes we see where we're headed. We catch a glimpse of the mountaintop. It's so beautiful it takes our breath away. But then we lose our footing. We tumble backwards, right back to the bottom, so that it feels like we'll never get up again. But we do. We help each other up, and the path becomes much clearer now. We move on together, and we get there. Okay, lots to say about this. Clearly, it's about Maggie and Negan needing to work through their issues, and together they're going to end up taking down the Dama and figuring out Herschel. I mean, he doesn't really need to be rescued in the sense that he doesn't want to be rescued, but they need to win him back over, show him that the Dama is evil. You know what I mean? Like, win him back emotionally, if you will, or spiritually. But the thing that struck me about this, there are a few words and phrases that I feel like are callbacks, but I think that this really is a show-wide theme. I was thinking that it would actually work really well for Daryl Dixon too. We've talked a lot about how both Daryl and Carol needed to work through their issues, and leaving to this new place, to France, and now they're in other places in Europe, has really helped them work through a lot of it, right? To work through their hopelessness with Carol and Sophia, and Daryl and his grandfather. And there's just been a lot of things that they clearly needed to work through. And they can't really move forward until they do that. So we're seeing this as a theme all over the place. And I like what they say about how what's the future without the past? What's an ending without the old story? That made me think of Beth, because now season 4 is an old story, right? It was a long time ago. And what's the future without the past? And there's just, that's the one cool thing about having the show run so long. I know that there are people who feel like it's been going too long and, they just need to end it. But they have a lot of history here now that they can work off. And I think that really deepens the storylines in a lot of ways. Um, the the part where the very last line where they say we get there, it took me a minute to remember where we'd heard that line before. And I was going, no, I remember someone saying let's get there. And it was actually Sasha. So it's from Alone. You guys, this line is from Alone, but it's not from Daryl and Beth's storyline. It's from Maggie, Sasha, and Bob's storyline. I believe it's right at the end. Um, After Sasha and Maggie come back together, when Maggie was lying down in front of the ice cream truck. I think it's that conversation. And, she talks about how Bob went on. And anyway, I'm not going to remember the whole thing word for word, but she says, okay, then let's go together and let's get there. And so this is a theme that they were pushing back in season 4 and specifically in Alone, which was one of Beth's big episodes. And it's still here, right? And um, so I just kind of love that they're calling back to that. What else do I have to say? So we have that. We have the show-wide episode of working together and working through old traumas, which is really great. And then, like I said, I think that these three are going to have to join forces. And they might not even be just taking down the Dama. They might be taking down New Babylon as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how they're moving forward. But I do really like the storyline now, especially the twist of Herschel being with the Dama and not trusting Maggie. I think that's really interesting. And she's going to have to go away, do a lot of things to kind of win him back. Whereas before, he was kind of in season 1, he was kind of a pawn. Of course, we didn't understand the extent to which the Dama had manipulated him and gotten into his good graces, but he didn't seem like he was a huge part of the story other than the catalyst, which is just, what made Maggie go there in the first place to get him back. So, I mean, that's most of what I have, but the other thing I was going to say that I alluded to earlier, um, in terms of, I was just kind of trying to think critically about Maggie and what changed her mind about hitting Negan with the bat. And of course, it was Ginny. But I was trying to come up with a higher level way to explain that. And I just, this thought came into my head that was like, they end up bonding over their lost children. So Negan lost Ginny, and Maggie, as I said, has really lost Herschel, not physically, he hasn't died, but she's lost him as a mother. She's lost him as a son. She's lost him as, someone who trusts her. And so they've lost their children in various ways. And if you even go back to All Out War, the reason that Rick decided to keep Negan alive was because Carl asked him to. So very much it has to do with their children and trying to protect their children and, of course, all the people they've lost, but the children always hit the hardest, right? And I think that's always been a theme with The Walking Dead, which is why we see them do things like Lizzie and Mika. And it seemed in season 4 like Rick had lost baby Judith, but of course, Tyrese got her out, and then there was a big reunion, and then I'm sure that is going to feed into all of the child and baby symbolism around Beth. So just something interesting to point out. And like I said, now I think that Negan will be redeemed in a big way by helping Maggie to win Herschel back. And of course, taking down the Dama. So, like I said, as a finale, I actually really enjoyed it. It had a lot of good stuff in it. And anyway, so I think that's about all I have. Not as much Beth symbolism here as there was in the last episode, but again, this was the finale, and they definitely needed to focus on the storylines here and get them wrapped up for the season. But obviously, we can see that they're going to do another season and there's more story to tell. So anyway, I think that's what I have for this episode. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll be back later in the week with some Ask videos. Talk to you soon.